To be back in India, and especially, I was listening to the and watching the video backstage, not just to talk about AI, but more importantly, to see AI in action in the country, thanks to the ingenuity of the human capital here, using it to change the lives of people and the citizens of this country, the outcomes for organizations of all sizes. Because to me, it always starts with our mission, which is ultimately about empowering every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And so what I want to spend some time this morning is all around what's that frontier look like today and where can we take it? Because ultimately, all this tech is only useful if it is able to bend the curve on the outcomes that we all care about. So if you sort of think about any organization, it cares about outcomes, about how are we dealing with our customers and our constituents. How are we internally changing the experience for our own employees to have the increased sense of agency that they can make a difference. And the efficiencies that come by deploying these AI learning systems. And also the pace of innovation inside the organization. Is it going up? And so these outcomes really are what we're after. I would sort of also submit that one of the things that we need to understand is a new framework for how to drive these outcomes. And it starts, quite frankly, with mindset, because in some sense, a deployment of an AI system is actually markedly different than even a previous generation information technology system, because you're deploying a learning system that is continuously getting better. So you need to even have things like, I have to reimagine a process ground up so that I can deploy a learning system inside of that process, versus saying, I'll just automate the existing process, right? So it requires a mindset set shift. That means you need to reskill yourself, to think about things differently. And in order to reskill yourself, you kind of need the everyday tool and the tool chain that allows you to do so, right? If you think about back in the 90s or in the late 80s even, when we said, we want to change forecasting as a process, the tool chain was Excel, email, and attachments. Right? And suddenly forecasting as a process changed, right? So we need to think about what's that equivalent of tool chain that allows us in the AI era to change. And then ultimately the data set, right? Because you really want to bring all of the data to those tools, to that new reimagined process. So that's really what I think the success in this AI era will be defined by. So to motivate this, I'm going to sort of go through what is essentially a tech stack. And I'll walk up this tech stack or walk down the tech stack. And the first place is that everyday tool chain, right? Because if you look back at the PC era, because the last time the real frontier of organizational work really changed when PCs became standard issues in the workplace, right? That was the last time when we could see productivity gains, because we started using digital tools to do information work, what we describe as knowledge work. And every business process in finance, in supply chain, in customer service, in sales, marketing, all rapidly changed. And so we're at that same point right now. So when we think about that experience layer, right, we're building that into what we describe as Copilot, right? We're building Copilots for many domains. In fact, we have a Copilot for consumers. We have Copilot for healthcare, the DAX Copilot. We have information work, which is the Copilot in Microsoft 365. We have for coding and for security. So we're building all of these. So I want to start by talking a little bit about what's the new suite in the office, in the workplace. So what we've done is we've taken the everyday tools that people are using and built the Copilot system into that. And that's, I think, essentially what the Microsoft 365 Copilot does, is it brings the latest and greatest intelligence to where work is happening so that we can help everyone starting to impact their work artifacts, and workflow, right? How does change happen? It doesn't happen by sort of saying AI is somewhere else and I am somewhere else. You have to bring the AI to essentially a bottom-up revolution where everybody is using it all the time to change their organizational frontier. And so that's the purpose of Microsoft 365 and the Copilot and how it's built in. In fact, up to now, we've been captivated by what we think of as a chat interface. And chat interfaces are going to be super critical forever, right? They're going to be there. It's kind of like ultimately we want to have a natural language conversation with AI. But we're going to get even high leverage with agents. And you already see this. Today, if you sort of think about the Copilot experience, it's like I go into work and I'm assigning tasks to agents. One such agent happens to be the researcher. So what is a researcher? It's like a researcher. It goes off and sort of, in fact, we have multiple models underneath a researcher. It comes back with a report and says, I researched this topic for you, right? And another agent we have built is an analyst. An analyst is literally, I can upload multiple or point it to multiple Excel spreadsheets or any other data, and it'll come back with what a data scientist would do, right? So it's an analyst that I have 24/7, right? All times of the day, I have the ability to assign tasks. And then, in fact, if you look at what we're doing is we're building agent mode. This became very popular for software development in coding, and I'll talk more about it. But we are bringing what software developers do with agent mode and something like VS Code now to Excel, to Word, to PowerPoint, where you're literally creating work artifacts using AI and completely changing. It's kind of like working with an expert to create and author a document. It's not just, oh, I'm authoring a document. And so these are just everyday agenting experiences that are already there and fundamentally changing and transforming how we work. Now, there is significant momentum. The good news here is I don't have to come and talk to you about this as somehow something new. When I look at even the scale deployments that are happening of Copilot across the country, everyone's using it, everyone's sort of showing their use cases, in fact, making it their own. This is not really our Copilot, it's your organization's Copilot. And you're building institutional strength through deployment and usage. As I always say, none of us sort of, when first set of PC productivity tools came out, it's not like we prayed at the altar of Excel. We just used it. And my hope here is the same, and that's what's already happening at scale. Now, one of the next layers, which is, I think, very critical, is this IQ layer. One of the challenges of, I would say, every previous era of technology was that we created many systems, and each of these systems had a data system associated with it. Unfortunately, the one artifact of that was we had many data silos. So one of the core goals for us is, because if you have these very powerful systems of intelligence, you somehow have to have it grounded in the context of your data, right? It can't be that, it comes into your organization with a lot of knowledge. It needs to pick up the knowledge you have, the context you have, to be useful. And so that's where, in fact, a lot of the hard work has to happen. And one of the biggest bootstraps there is what we call the work IQ, right? So if you're a Microsoft 365 customer today, I would say one of the most important databases inside your organization is the database that recognizes the relationships between people, like org relationships, between people and their projects, between their emails, their files in SharePoint and OneDrive, and relate all of that, right? So work IQ is effectively that relationship manifest in a way such that AI can take advantage of it. So we're extending that with even what we call Fabric IQ, right? It's not just what's in the graph underneath Microsoft 365, but literally all of the operational data, all of the analytical data underneath Power BI, for example, plus all of even things like time series data. So all of that is being brought together inside of this Fabric IQ. And then we can even extend it further with a thing called Foundry IQ, which brings in best-in-class search across unstructured data with all of the structured stuff that's there in Fabric. right? So if you can then think about the knowledge of the organization now in this IQ layer across Fabric, Foundry, and Work IQ, powering the agents that you build in Copilot. That's sort of the second layer of this tech stack. Now, if you have all of this, you can now get to the tools chain, right? So you say, well, this is fantastic. I have the experience layer. I have the data layer structured. What do? I start building. And in order to build, we have a fantastic tool chain and which you can start using every day. So one of the things we're excited about is this, the first one is this app builder, right? So the app builder, what it does is you can just literally use natural language to start building applications. In fact, Bill, for the longest time, used to have this frustration called, why should there be any difference between a document and an application and a website, right? That was sort of one of the original computer science dreams is, why would we want to treat these three artifacts as separate things? Why can't I treat them all? I want to take a document and convert it into an app, or if I want to create a website into a document, it should be possible. And guess what? We now can do it. We can do it with something like App Builder, where you can build an application. We also then built Copilot Studio for you to be able to build agents, right? This is not, you don't need to be a professional developer. So I think of sometimes these are the new Word, Excel, PowerPoint like skills we are picking up, right? Oh, I go use App Builder to build apps, right? Back in the day, we had things like Front Page, right? So this is the moral equivalent of that. Copilot Studio allows you to build agents today by just expressing them in natural language, grounding it in some knowledge databases, like things like SharePoint or what have you, and then you can have agents that then plug into Copilot. And of course, we have Foundry. And Foundry is the way to build even multi-agent, sophisticated AI systems on your own. So the goal for us is to be able to have all of the frameworks available for anyone to be able to deploy complex AI systems. And one of the things that's key is it's no longer about any one model. It's about having all the models accessible to you. And in fact, we have 11,000 plus models in Foundry today, because you will choose, sometimes for latency, sometimes for price, sometimes for performance in a particular domain, and you want to be able to have that selection. And in order to make that selection, you need a lot more than just the models. You have to have the evaluation frameworks. You need to have the guardrails around it. And that's what we're doing, is building a complete sophisticated tool chain in Microsoft Foundry so that you can then start building these multi-agent systems and then deploy them and have them dock with and integrate with even the experience layer and your data layer that you've set up with all of those IQ things that I talked about. Now, the tooling, when it comes to what developers are using, we're very excited about sort of what's happening with GitHub, right? When I look at GitHub, and in particular in India, I think India is projected now by 2030 to have the largest developer community in the world. 57.5 million by 2030, and that's going to be the largest developer community. And it's just fantastic to see that human capital and the potential of that human capital being applied to societal scale problems in terms of building these agentic systems. And one of the things that we're also doing is, think of GitHub as a classic example of a system that has access to all of these agents, right? So we are in fact thinking of it as not just one model, but it is Agent HQ, where, in fact, if you look at even today, when I go to GitHub and use the primitives of GitHub, I will have access to every model that can go to work on my repo, right? So that is, in fact, it's a great example of how I think every other system is going to look like increasingly. And so that's what we describe it as Agentic HQ. And it'll have different form factors, right? Sometimes I'm in GitHub in VS Code, right? So I use the agent mode in Visual Studio. Sometimes I'm on my mobile app. In fact, I get up in the morning, I just go to my repo and start some agents, and they start working on my code base. Sometimes it's command line. And so it's not even about, it's just the chat interface, right? These form factors, all of them are important, and they all will coexist in how I'll interface with my AI coding system, which happens to be GitHub Copilot. And you will build all these custom agents. And talking about custom agents, I thought I'll show you. In fact, this is my laptop. No kidding aside, I hope you will not get exposed to something that I shouldn't be exposing to you, but I wanted to show you what I built over the Thanksgiving weekend using GitHub Copilot. So this is my Azure project, actually. So it's, in fact, deployed. Thankfully, it even works. It's deployed, I think, in north central Canada somewhere. But nevertheless, I'm here, and I can access. This is my GitHub repo. So basically, I built a multi-agent deep research project, right? So this is my GitHub repo. And I called it DeepR. And by the way, all this is coming to Copilot, right? So, I'm like the product manager now working with my Copilot team, convincing them that these features are worth building, but assume that they're going to come. So what I did was I said, okay, if I have all these 11,000 models, what can I do with it? So I said, let me implement some new decision frameworks of using all this intelligence to make better decisions. So one of the things I was inspired by one of the famous researchers in AI called Andrej Karpathy. He published a thing called the AI Council recently. It's kind of like having a selection board, right? You have a bunch of selectors and you have the chairman of the selection committee. And so in this case, I can select all the models that I want, right? Which is I can have GPT-5.1, Claude, Gemini, Kimi 2, Grok, whatever I want. They're all, so think of them as committee members. And then I can even select who is the chairman. And that also can have a drop down, and I can select them, and then I can start the research, right? So that's one such framework. I also have another one called DXO, and this is pretty cool. So this is a decision orchestrator, which we first tested in healthcare. And the idea was to have different role assignments. So for example, you have a lead researcher, and the lead researcher's job is to do the breadth-first, broad research of all topics. In this case, I assigned it to GPT-5. And then I said, okay, we need to have a critical reviewer. This critical reviewer is supposed to evaluate and identify any deficiencies in the methods you use, right? Think about that, right? Which is, if you sort of, if you think about any team construct, that's kind of how we use different people in different roles to play so that we can get to a better decision. Then we have a domain expert, right? And then I can have a data analyst. So think of this as multiple roles. In this case, being played by multiple models, right? So multiple roles, multiple models being brought, right? And then I can even have another type of decision framework called ensemble mode. And what does ensemble do? It does a parallel query to every model I choose, anonymizes the responses, and then synthesizes the responses, right? So these are three, think of them as metacognition frameworks, right? This is where I think when you say, what do I as an information worker do going forward? Raj Reddy used to have this beautiful metaphor as AI's real power is when I can use it as a guardian angel or as a cognitive amplifier. Think of these as all cognitive amplifying frameworks. Or I can have a DXO-based analysis. I can have a selection ensemble, and so on and so forth. So that's the idea. And of course, like being a good South Asian, what does one use all this power? Select the best Indian cricket test team, right? So that's what I did. Especially in a time like this, after the last test series, I think we definitely need that. So what I did was, let me see. So I used, let's take this one. This is the selection committee one, right? This is a classic. In fact, our selection board hopefully works like this, which is there's a chairman and there is a selection committee members. So this is the chairman's synthesis of, first of all the reports. So it sort of said, no problem, these are all the definitive all-time greats who got selected. You got Sunil opening, you have Sehwag, all of that. And here is the fascinating thing. It starts sort of talking about the key debates. For example, it says,
మీ వ్యాపారం అభివృద్ధి కావాలని కోరుకుంటున్నారా? అయితే వెంటనే QNews ని సంప్రదించండి. స్కూల్స్, కాలేజెస్, బ్యాంక్స్, షాప్స్, ఆఫీస్ ప్రమోషన్స్, ల్యాండ్ ప్రమోషన్స్, పొలిటికల్ ప్రమోషన్స్, రెస్టారెంట్ ప్రమోషన్స్, హాస్పిటల్ ప్రమోషన్స్, పుట్టినరోజు వేడుకలు, శుభకార్యాలు, వ్యాపారాలు ఏవైనా, సందర్భం ఏదైనా ఇప్పుడే QNews ద్వారా తెలియజేయండి. మీ వ్యాపారాన్ని అభివృద్ధి చేసుకోండి.